Let's take a short break with a homegrown uplifting track. This is Be Who You Wanna Be from Newcastle band Never Say Never Music.
Be who you wanna be.
This is for the struggle. This is for the hustle.
Be who you wanna be.
This is for the struggle. Come on, use that muscle.
Check out Be Who You Wanna Be and more from Never Say Never Music on your favourite streaming platform or visit neversaynevermusic.com.
Bring it back.
Towards Understanding with Clayton Bielen values being a positive radio program for everyone. As we present today's episode, please accept this little ears warning. Some of the themes discussed may not be suitable for children.
This is Towards Understanding. You're with Clayton Bielen, and via the wonders of Zoom, it is wonderful to be able to have a chat to the author of the book Loved, Saved, Healed. Louise Wilkinson joins us. G'day, Louise.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing very, very well, thank you. And it is so good to have you on the program with us. And we do want to just give a bit of a little ears warning that we are going to talk about some pretty heavy topics today, often in the program. As we head towards a better understanding of our world, we acknowledge that sometimes we have to have a chat about some of the darker parts of someone's story to understand the light and the hope, and there certainly is plenty in your story, Louise, but just for those, we just want to make sure we acknowledge that. Louise, often we sort of start at the start of someone's story. I want to start a bit more in the middle of your story, actually, which was the moment when you realised, actually, I need to go through some processing of things that have happened in the past. So can we sort of start in that middle, that time when you realised, actually, I've got to work through something that's been going on for me many, many years before?
Yes, so I think it was around 2017. I found myself back in hospital in a mental health ward, I think maybe for the third or fourth time. I'd always really struggled with my mental health, anxiety, depression, PTSD, and I'd been through a period of psychosis, which had led me to go into hospital. And I had tried many forms of therapy and many medications, and nothing had really worked for me in terms of processing the trauma and being able, to live comfortably and happily. So I started what is called schema therapy, which is basically a type of trauma therapy. And it was traumatizing, but it was so freeing to actually be able to process the trauma in my brain and have it put into the right place in my brain. So I was able to, process it and work through it. And it was just life-changing, really, to be honest.
Yeah. So as you went through this, you started sort of unraveling some of the past, and this is where we do need to have some conversations around it, because the past for you was incredibly traumatic, and something that no one should ever have to go through. Could you take us through what you were discovering and processing as you went through that time?
Yes, so I was sexually abused by my father for around 13 years, which is a really, really long time. The abuse started in infancy. Sounds crazy, but I've actually had memories of being an infant and it starting. The schema therapy was mostly revolved around recovering those memories and healing from them. I was also trafficked by him to some of his friends in probably my early teens, which, was obviously just the most awful thing to have to go through. I mean, as a teenager, you're growing up and you're discovering yourself, and you're supposed to have that sense of autonomy, of your body and who you are. And that just wasn't happening for me in my childhood. So those were the main things that I had to, process through the schema therapy. Which was incredibly difficult.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and not just that discovery, it should have been a safe place, your father as well, of course, on top of all of that as well, Louise. Can I ask before we talk a bit more about what it meant to process and then get through that, for somebody from the outside, how does it work? I'd imagine that there's been those questions that you go, all right, well, you weren't, everyone can understand sort of shutting down memories that you just cannot go back to. Is there a process you've gone through to go, how are these really true memories? How do I know that they're true memories and I'm not sort of now processing them backwards when I don't remember it? I'd imagine it would be an incredibly difficult and really wrenching experience to go through that. How does all that work?
So I left New Zealand in 1988 and we actually moved to Perth as a family, and it was probably 6 to 12 months after that I don't know how, but my brain just stopped remembering what had happened to me. It was almost like I was, given a new kind of chance to have a new life, and my brain somehow, I think it was just extreme repression, just shut down all memories of what had happened to me. And it wasn't until 1997 when I split up with my partner who had cancer. We were both very young, 23 at the time, and the trauma of that kind of just launched me into this space that I'd never been in before. So I had body memories and, cognitive memories. I was extremely dysfunctional. It was like flooding. So it was just basically every single thing that I'd ever repressed came back to me all at once, within a few months. Which was just horrendous because I always thought I had a great relationship with my dad. I always thought that I had, a fantastic childhood, and there were many parts of my childhood that were good, but I had just had no recollection of anything. The only thing I could remember was that my dad was very sleazy with me, like very inappropriate as an adult, like making comments and trying to touch my body, and I just thought that was just who he was. But when I remembered all that stuff in 1997, it was just like a light bulb going off. It was like even though it sounds weird, I became alive. My brain was just like, oh, okay, well, that just makes total sense now, as devastating as it was.
So let's talk through some of that, I suppose, and the journey of going back and understanding and having to sort of to be able to work through. I'm imagining you have to go and actually process that as well. You talked about this sort of the schema sort of idea with it. Were there people around you who you could trust? I'd imagine you'd get to a spot where you probably weren't trusting too many people.
So the therapist that I had, funnily enough, I believe God chose him for me, was a Kiwi, and I thought that would be really kind of triggering for me, but it was really comforting, which is quite odd.
Yeah.
But he had actually worked a lot with sexual offenders in New Zealand, so working with a lot of pedophiles and a lot of men, that were doing just unspeakable things to children. But he had a really good grasp of memories and how it worked. And he was just the most incredibly patient man I'd ever met. And I immediately felt at home with him. So he was one of my main people that I trusted. And I'd had many therapists before, but I'd only ever really kind of skimmed the surface of the abuse. This was going right deep into core memories, and there's a thing in schema therapy. It's kind of a memory correction process where you recall a really traumatic event, and then the therapist will put himself into the event and rescue you from that. Sounds a little bit weird when I talk about it, but it actually really works. It actually resets your brain so you're not so traumatized, and so those memories can go into that part of your brain and just become memories. They're not in that active front part of your brain where they're just controlling everything all the time. They're actually able to be processed as memories and put in the right filing cabinet, if you will. Yeah. The other person was obviously my husband, someone that I really trusted greatly, and he was there for me, the whole time. So that, that was beneficial.
Yeah. As you did process, and the book's called Love Saved Healed, there was also and you certainly credit a lot that Jesus' patience, I suppose, and grace and courage and healing in all of what that is. How did faith play a part of this as well?
So I got to know Jesus in 2012. I was in a terrible space. I was a single mum. I had terrible PTSD. I was a drug addict, and it's almost like he just knocked, and I just, accepted his invitation. And I didn't really know what I was doing at the time. I kind of just said yes, and, I accept Jesus into my heart. Then I just kind of kept living my life. But over a period of time, he just started changing me. First, he got me free off drugs, which I never thought would happen. And then obviously he helped me through the schema therapy. And he just, the word of God just replaced all that negativity and all that rubbish that was left over from the abuse, that I was to blame for the abuse, that I was, to live in shame for all of my life, that I was never able to have proper relationships. And so the word of God just replaced all of that stuff. And it was like my brain just became new, really.
Yeah. Just remarkable that's the state that it can be in that regards. Even as you touched on there as well, Louise, there's the addictions and all sorts of things that you found yourself in as well. As you look back, I think most people, if they've even just heard the story so far, like, boy, no one deserves to go through one part of these things, let alone multiple parts. How do you reflect on, I suppose, even especially from God's perspective, that there's lots of conversations in faith communities around, that people hurt people and it's not God doing it and all these sorts of things. But
yes,
as you look back at the trauma, the abuse and the things that have occurred, how do you, I suppose, put God into that picture and the fact that you went through that? Where was God in all of that, I suppose, is the question.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and it's something that I talk about in my book. I think I really kind of struggled with it, on and off for the first few years of where was he and why didn't he protect me and step in? And I mean, it's something that a lot of believers and unbelievers talk about, but I just firmly believe he obviously knew what was happening to me and he could have rescued me at any time, and he chose not to. And I think that he chose not to because he wanted me to be ultimately dependent on him and trust in him. But he also wanted me to be going through all of that so I could be really strong for other people and I could write my book for other survivors. And that is why I wrote my book, is so I can help other survivors, with healing and forgiveness and that journey that seems kind of impossible. But I also think, if he was going to rescue me from that situation, he would have to rescue everyone. Like, how would he choose? It's like, if I, with my 3 children, and God said to me, right, you have to choose to save one and one will perish and one will suffer. Like, how would I make that choice? I wouldn't be able to. And I firmly believe that God is the same with us, that he could rescue all of us, but we would never really grow and, develop that relationship with him, which is really key. And we also wouldn't get the empathy that we need to help others. And that is why I believe I went through what I did. Yeah.
We're going to be back with Louise Wilkinson, the author of the book Loved, Saved, Healed, in a couple of minutes' time. We want to talk about a few things. We want to talk firstly about how she's able to use her story to help others, and part of why, as she mentioned there, she has written this book. Also about what about justice in this situation for her father, for others potentially around that as well. We'll have conversations with Louise about that next here on Towards Understanding.
Share your brand, your event, your message.
Across 90 Christian radio stations and major cities in Australia and New Zealand.
By sponsoring Towards Understanding, hosted by Clayton Bielan.
More than 210,000 people tune into Towards Understanding each week. And with just one sponsorship, you'll reach this immense engaged audience. Find out more about this exciting and unique opportunity now
on the sponsorship page at positivemedia.com.au.
Louise, could we ask the question, you've talked about this sense that, you've had to do some hard yards, and, we're talking about it in a couple of minutes. It's literally decades of work to get to a better place and to even be able to talk about this. Justice for your father, for the friends, his friends are abused as well. What happened and occurred in that space?
Well, not a lot, to be honest. I think after I remembered, I just kind of cut contact with my parents for quite a long time. And my mother passed away in 2004. And then after that, I just drifted away from my father, to be honest. I just decided that my punishment, or the punishment, was going to be that he was no longer in my life. So I've never pursued, legal justice for what happened. I think because in my mind, it's not going to change anything, and it's not going to make my life any better. It's not going to change what happened. To be honest, I don't know why I never really did pursue justice for him. I think as he gets older, he's heading into his 80s now, that it just wouldn't he probably wouldn't even go to jail anyway. It would be very difficult and complicated, especially because the abuse happened in New Zealand, and he probably would be deported if he was found guilty. And I don't want that. I'm not really interested in that. But what I am interested in is God's vengeance and God's justice. And I do believe that he will, that there will be justice for me, but it's going to be in the supernatural that, I probably won't even know about it.
Yeah, yeah. The book Love Saved Healed, which is quite something. Would you say that you are healed from your experiences now, or still healing?
I think I'm still healing. Every time I think, okay, I'm at that place where, there's no more work to be done, something will happen, in my children's lives or my life. Things are happening in my marriage at the moment and some things are coming back to me. I've had new memories in the last few years, which I just didn't think was possible. But, I see it as, we're like onions. There's lots of layers, and the forgiveness is also, there's a lot of layers of forgiveness. Every year or two, I'll be praying about something and God will say to me, you need to forgive him again. And I'll be like, again? And he says, yes, you need to keep forgiving him, because that's how forgiveness works. That it's a very complicated process. I don't think I'll ever be not dealing with it. I think it will always affect me. And I've had to come to peace with that.
Yeah, yeah. Part of why you wrote this book was to help others as well. Talk us through, I suppose, before we even talk about how you hope to help, the fact that you went through this. The byline's a story of hope. I would imagine even writing a book like this brings back memories. So talk us through the process of writing it.
Yeah, so I think it was just before my son left for the army, and every time I kind of sat down and had my quiet time, God was like, oh, I want you to write something. And I was like, okay. So I'd always kept journals, and I thought maybe he just wanted me to keep journaling. And, over a number of months, it became clear that he wanted me to write my story. So at the start, I kind of just ignored him and was like, oh, yeah, I'll get to that, when I want to. And then it just became that every time I had quiet time with God, he was like, no, you need to write your story now. And he became quite loud. And quite persistent. So I started writing about from 2012 when I was saved. And then I kind of stopped, and then I went back to the start of when my parents met. And I knew that the first few chapters were going to be really tough for me, like about my abuse and what I suffered from that. So that was really difficult. I actually stopped sleeping a few times. I had quite bad insomnia, and it made me remember more things, and it was really traumatic for me, but I kind of pushed through it because I thought that obviously there's a purpose to all of this. And I just really trusted God that he knew what he was doing, even if I didn't know what I was doing. And so the book kind of went back and forth. I'd write some from the second part of the book, which was after I was saved. Then I would go back to the start, and write more things about my childhood. And so there wasn't any kind of linear way that the book went. It just kind of chopped and changed. And then suddenly it was finished. And I was like, what am I going to do with this? Like, I knew that God wanted me to publish it, but I always thought I'll publish it because I want to help others. But I didn't realize the amount of healing that I got from writing the book. I became a lot more stable. A lot happened for me while writing it, and there was a lot of healing for myself, which was actually a real surprise, to be honest.
Yeah. When you talk about healing, what does that look like for you?
For me, in my everyday life, it's just that I don't carry around this massive amount of fear with me and this massive amount of panic. Because my life was so traumatizing in the early years, I just learned to deal with a certain amount of chaos in my mind. So everything was just very chaotic for me. I was never able to sit down properly and rest. My cortisol levels were just always high, even as an adult. I suffered from PTSD, extreme PTSD or complex PTSD. So the fight or flight response was just turned on all the time. So I was angry. I was, emotional a lot of the time, but I couldn't process my emotions. I couldn't even, describe my emotions or my feelings. So the healing that's come is, I'm a lot more peaceful now. I can sit down and watch a movie without being distracted back in 1980 something. I can work now, I can love my children, and I can be present in today a lot more than from when before I was healed.
Yeah. Your heart for it was, I'm sure, to sort of tell your story. That's one part of it, but also very much has been to help others who may have gone through something similar or are going through something that has, serious consequences as well. Talk us through about the aims from that perspective of the book.
Yeah, so over the years, I've met multiple women mostly that, have suffered abuse or, there's all different sorts of sexual abuse. There's covert abuse and there's like full-on abuse like I went through. But I have actually met a lot of people, and I think they either deal with it in two ways. They either shut it down and don't deal with it at all, or it just causes so much chaos, and conflict in their lives, but they just don't really know how to deal with it. And I think the Jesus thing was what prompted me to write the book, because without him, I still would be going in and out of hospital and I still would be back where I was before. So that was kind of my aim, was to introduce people to Jesus, because he is the ultimate healer. And he will heal us, when we ask him and we invite him into our lives. Like, God has done absolute miraculous things in my life, and not just me, but my family and those people around me as well, that I've been praying for. And I've seen a lot of miracles since I got saved. And so I think introducing people to Jesus was a massive motivator to write the book.
What about the response to it in that regards? How have people responded? And I'm sure, and certainly not asking you to share people's names, but what have people said about the fact that they've been able to read that and be a part of it? Received a really good response from, my network of friends. And unfortunately, my sister has not read the book, and she said she's just not able to, and I've accepted that. But yeah, in my kind of group of friends. Is that because she went through something similar? Is that the intent of that, or what was the reasons around that? She
didn't really say, but she really struggles with what I went through. She won't talk about it with me. It's just something that she's just chosen not to deal with.
Yep.
It's just too difficult, I think.
Fair enough.
And I think she sees my life as, well, if you're going to deal with your abuse, then this is the sort of life you're going to have. Yeah. And I'm assuming she just decided a long time ago that's not the life that she wanted. Yep. So I've had to accept that, which has been quite difficult. But apart from her, I've an amazing response, to be honest. I've had a lot of friends that have come to me, and when I had a book launch here in Perth, and it was only a small kind of affair, but I've had people approach me and say, I had this happen to me when I was young, and just knowing that my story has touched them, it just makes it all worth it. Like, if I can get one person to deal with this, with their stuff and their abuse, and another person maybe to come to Jesus, then, it's all been worth it. Yeah.
As you sort of talk about the story and have these aspects, what do you see as your the future parts of what your life is? I feel like there's a lot of abuse that's occurred. There's then understanding of that. There's continual sort of healing, and as much as you've indicated that, well, there's still healing happening, but it feels like the majority of the big parts of what that is have been done, so you can do those things that you mentioned. You can be present with your kids and those sorts of things. What do you think the next stage of your life will actually look like, Louise?
I would really love just to, continue with a ministry, really, of just sharing about the gospel and sharing what Jesus has done for me, and really just meeting with other survivors, because sexual abuse just has such detrimental effect on all parts of your body, not just, your brain, but your physical body as well, and your emotions. So I'd really just love to connect with other survivors and just tell them that there's hope, for healing, and maybe share about my experiences with the schema therapy, because before that, I just wasn't functioning as a human being. I didn't even know the therapy existed. So perhaps, having some sort of healing ministry would just be so wonderful. I feel like I'm ready now. I'm in a space where I can talk about what happened to me, and I don't have to go running off and hide somewhere. I don't have flashbacks, or, I can talk about what happened to me, and I can go to bed that night and sleep. So you are right in saying that the majority of my healing, has been done.
Yeah. Well, Louise, thank you so much for having a chat to us today. It's important to have these conversations. It's important to talk about the fact that there is a God who loves us, who, despite whatever we have gone through, can heal and help, and that there is hope in that regards, and your story certainly does do that. We wish you all the best with this book, Loved, Saved and Healed. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat to us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a real blessing.
My guest, Louise Wilkinson, here on Towards Understanding.
Share your brand, your event, your message across 90 Christian radio stations and major cities in Australia and New Zealand by sponsoring Towards Understanding, hosted by Clayton Bielen. More than 210,000 people tune into Towards Understanding each week, and with just one sponsorship, you'll reach this immense engaged audience. Find out more about this exciting and unique opportunity now on the sponsorship page at positivemedia.com.au. Let's take a short break with a homegrown uplifting track. This is Be Who You Wanna Be from Newcastle band Never Say Never Music.
Be who you wanna be.
This is for the struggle. This is for the hustle.
Be who you wanna be.
This is for the struggle. Come on, use that muscle.
Check out Be Who You Wanna Be and more from Never Say Never Music on your favourite streaming platform, or visit neversaynevermusic.com.
Bring it back.